This episode is brought to you by Anytime Fitness. We may talk a whole lot about sports, but when it comes to keeping fit ourselves, there's definitely room for improvement. I hit this point early July. I was just like, I am not in good enough shape. I started trying to walk at least 15,000 steps a day or hiking or just anything to keep my legs moving. Now it's the end of 2023. I feel great. I had a physical 3 weeks ago, and the guy was like, "You're doing great. You're doing better than you were 3 years ago." I felt great. Whatever your goals are, progress is possible thanks to Anytime Fitness. Get a personalized plan and support from an expert coach anytime, anywhere. Visit anytimefitness.com to try Anytime Fitness for free. Start to train for your life. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. See website for details. This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian software like Jira, Confluence, and Trello help power global collaboration for all teams so they can accomplish everything that's impossible alone. Because individually we're great, but together we're so much better. Learn how to unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.com. Atlassian. Tap the banner or visit this episode's page to learn more.
Welcome to Beyond the Arc. My name is Kevin O'Connor. I hope you enjoyed the opening 3 days of the NBA playoffs as much as I did. Today, I brought on Rob Mahoney from The Ringer to talk about it all. Let's get going with Rob. Welcome to Beyond the Arc, Rob. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Kev?
I'm doing excellent, man. So on Saturday night, we saw the Celtics just absolutely dominate the Hawks, 112-99. I feel like so far this postseason, through 3 days so far, Rob, the biggest winner is the Celtics. We see them go up 1-0, totally outmatch the Hawks. And despite his great moments, in game one for the Sixers, Harden doesn't appear to have quite the same burst off the dribble, which could be good for a round two matchup. And then the Bucks, they lose game one to the Heat. Giannis Antetokounmpo hurts his tailbone. Shams Charania has said on Run It Back on Monday that he could return in game two. It's more of a pain tolerance issue. But regardless, you have Giannis potentially limited. Sixers with Harden. He says his Achilles is not going to get back to 100%. Feels like the Celtics right now have a leg up in the Eastern Conference.
Well, especially just because they were so commanding, right? You have all these contextual factors with these other teams. But they came out, they played about as well as you could expect them to play in the first half of their game against the Hawks. Just absolutely walloped Atlanta. The defense looked tight. The offense moved well. They showed that, although they did have some hiccups in the regular season, there were a lot of ebbs and flows with Boston's three-point shooting, with some of their defensive focus. When they needed to buckle down, when the playoffs started, they're here. This looks a lot like the team that got to the NBA Finals last year. And if that's what they're going to be all throughout this run, you have to love their chances.
Absolutely. And I think for them, you think about Boston's weaknesses last year, obviously dealing with, up and down health for Robert Williams, Derek White in the postseason for Boston, all postseason long. He's getting, completely sagged off of. He's a non-threat. This year, it's been totally different for them. He's shooting 38.1% from three on 4.8 attempts compared to 31.2% all of last season. White, he's taking pull-up jumpers against Trae Young in that first quarter, attacking Trae. For the Celtics, you got Robert Williams looking healthy and Derek White confident on offense. Some of their issues that we saw last year seem to have been resolved.
Yeah, and especially when you think about all of those potential shooters you could have sagged off of, right? It's not just White, it's Marcus Smart, it's when they're playing two bigs together. And yet, as we saw in this initial matchup, Atlanta's defense is spaced way out. They're giving a lot of respect to all of those shooters to the point that they aren't even really able to provide any help, any rim protection whatsoever. Guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are getting all the way to the rim. Something is going to have to give there, right? Like you're either going to have to live with some of your Derek White threes and your Marcus Smart threes and things like that, or you're going to have to live with getting up wide open shots inside. And we've seen that formula is just not tenable for the Hawks.
In that game one, we see Robert Williams just flying around for Boston on the defensive end of the floor. And regardless of the series moving forward with Philadelphia, with Embiid, or potentially Giannis, or if the Bucks, do get upset at some point, having that too big option is going to be pivotal for them. And now for Atlanta, they're down 1-0. They're not favorites at all by any means in the series. What needs to happen, Rob, for the Hawks to actually make this competitive moving forward?
For as much as we were, just talking about their defense, offensively, they have to get more varied. They have to find ways to build off of what Trae is doing without being completely completely reliant on what Trae is doing. That's always the Hawks' problem, right? It's like, how do you activate every corner of your roster at the same time when you have a guy who you kind of want to have the ball in the hands of? You want a playmaker like that to be in control. They just look totally locked up. They look like they're going to have problems all series long, from initiation to finishing, every step of the way on their offense. As much as I would love to sit here and give you a laundry list of adjustments for them, I don't see it, right? Like, I don't see the optionality here for the Hawks in terms of, you just make these quick pivots and your team looks totally different. This is what they are offensively. And this is what the Celtics are defensively, which is a team that can put Derek White on the ball, they can put Smart on the ball, they can put length on the ball, and can really stymie you.
Well, the Hawks are going to have to address that laundry list of adjustments during the offseason with Quinn Snyder, first-year head coach, installing a new system for the Bucks. Now they're down 1-0. Mike Budenholzer is going to have to make those adjustments mid-series. And in the past, we've seen with Coach Bud, that's been up and down. Sometimes he's not making adjustments. Sometimes he's slow to do it. The real issue for them is the fact Giannis Antetokounmpo plays 11 minutes, takes a hard fall against a block/charge attempt right outside the restricted area. We don't know Giannis' status for sure yet. As I said, Shams Charania says he could play on Wednesday night with their game 2. The one silver lining, regardless of Giannis' status, at least to me, Rob, is Khris Middleton. Scores 33 points on 20 shots with 9 rebounds and 4 assists in game 1. He looked more like himself than he has this entire series. So, if the Bucks do get Giannis back, that has to at least be encouraging for them. But let's say they don't. Let's say Giannis doesn't return. Do the Bucks have enough to still, win this series against the Heat?
They do, but it's going to take some real doing, right? It's going to take incredible performances like this one from Middleton, but also Jrue Holiday is going to have to shoot a lot better. Brook Lopez is going to have to be much more activated offensively. And honestly, those things are going to be true even if Giannis comes back, but is in kind of diminished form, right? Like there's a huge range of outcomes here, from Giannis doesn't play in the series at all to he's out there kind of, going through the motions, trying to contribute, but is obviously limited. And they're going to have to prepare for all of those. The trouble with Milwaukee, so many of the adjustments that they can make come down to those 3 core guys, right? It's Lopez and Middleton and Holiday. Their role players are who they are. They're going to be spacing the floor. They're going to be trying to hold up on their defensive assignments. But you're just going to be asking Jrue Holiday, Khris Middleton primarily, to play huge minutes, have huge responsibilities on both ends of the floor, and try to kind of cut back on those things however you can to kind of just get them even just a minute's rest.
You mentioned Brook Lopez's offensive role that needing to be recalibrated. He shoots 4 of 7 in the game, but only 4 shots inside the arc. You would think in a game that Giannis is playing only 11 minutes, he's sidelined, you would try to, as we saw over the course of the season, whenever Giannis was out, they turned up Brook Lopez's interior offensive role. We saw him kind of reaching back to do some of the stuff that he did with the Nets when he was an all-star caliber post guy, not just shooting pop threes and spacing the floor. Like, what happened in that game 1 for Brook to not get those interior touches, and would you expect that to change moving forward in the series?
It felt a little bit like a team getting stuck in its pre-game game plan, right? Like still kind of thinking about their spacing and their roles as if Giannis was out there, when, as you're saying, if Giannis isn't playing, Brook Lopez needs to be a very focal part of your offense, whether it's post-ups, whether it's rolls. We saw him and Jrue Holiday have a good connection for a few lobs. But also he's shown he can grab and go, pump faking threes. He's driven really effectively this season. There's just no reason for him not to be doing that against a team as small as Miami. I know they're pesky. I know they have great hands. I know no one wants to drive past Jimmy Butler because he's going to poke the ball loose. But you have to be willing to do that. You have to be able to do that. Milwaukee just badly needs his offense. And that felt to me, to your point about Coach Bud, this is a team that is not always great about adjustments in general, but especially is not always fast enough with in-game adjustment, right? Between games, we'll see if they go back to the drawing board, what they come up with for Brook.
I mean, on the flip side of that, you have Eric Spoelstra, who's been a master of adjustments throughout his entire coaching career, going back to the days with LeBron James. But they're going to be without Tyler Hero, who broke his hand in the game. He plays only 19 minutes. We see Duncan Robinson actually make an appearance late in the game. He's coming in. Maybe you have somebody like him. Miami does have depth, and they have different options coming off their bench. You'll see Max Strus perhaps play a bigger role. With Tyler Hero being out, that definitely hurts their offense, Rob. But do you think that we saw it in the play-in and throughout the season, sometimes Miami's back line, when they would switch or play aggressive on defense, they're just so small. and Hero being a part of that as a below average defender. Is there any silver linings here to the Heat losing Tyler Hero and how it could aid their defense, or is this just, overall a loss for them?
I think it's overall a loss. They're just a team that, despite how they looked in game one, can look really raggedy offensively on the wrong night. And a lot of that comes down to their three-point shooting. If Gabe Vincent and Max Strus and a lot of these role players are hitting, it's going to look awesome. And they're going to put up 130 points like they did against a very good defense, even without Giannis in the Bucks. I don't know that I'm counting on that happening every game. Those shooters do tend to ebb and flow. Strus in particular has had a pretty down season, turned up lately. We'll kind of see where that ends up kind of leveling out. But ultimately, if they're not hitting like that, the offense isn't going to look as pretty. And if Milwaukee makes some kind of defensive adjustment, and I would expect, Brook Lopez even just playing a little higher on the drop, for example, just a subtle adjustment, coming a little closer to Bam Adebayo, who's like feasting on free throw line area jumpers in this game. If you can do something like that, you can really cut off the offense. And that's where missing Hero hurts, right? Like Tyler Hero is a guy who, for better or worse, is going to get shots up. He has a broken hand. He's going to take that open corner three anyway, just to see if it goes in. They need a little bit of that shooting and abandon sometimes.
Robin, when we're back after the break, we'll talk about the Cavs and the Knicks. All right, Rob, you saw my breakdown of the Cavaliers getting dominated by the Knicks on the boards. We saw the Knicks win game one, 101-97 on the road against Cleveland. That seems to be an issue for Cleveland moving forward in the series, Rob.
Can somebody box out Josh Hart? You expect Mitchell Robinson is going to be a factor on the glass. Julius Randle, especially with just the strength discrepancy with Evan Mobley, is going to be able to get to some. But you got to put a body on guards. And that's where Cleveland has problems sometimes, whether it's their guards getting blown by defensively, and then you have Evan Mobley or Jared Allen has to rotate and give up rebounding position, or they're just not boxing out their guy. They're not keeping their guy out of the lane. And it's true across the perimeter rotation for Cleveland. It's got to be a team effort.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned that Josh Hart rebound that he had over Donovan Mitchell. He's just like, he looks like a running back, just zigzagging past him, juking him like in Madden. And then you have the size of Cleveland all year long. We're talking about Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, 2 7-footers. They're huge. They're versatile. I felt like they looked kind of small compared to Mitchell Robinson and Julius Randle. Randle being wide and Mitchell Robinson being just absolutely enormous. I don't know, Rob. I mean, I think for Cleveland, they're not out of the series necessarily. Like their offense, is struggling throughout the game, and yet they're still up late. But there's just some of those edges that the Knicks have that perhaps I might have underrated. Actually, I picked Cleveland to win it. I feel like I might have underrated the Knicks a bit in heading into the series.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like a series that's all about those edges, whether it's the literal margins of the game, your offensive rebounds, your loose balls, your transition breakouts, or it's kind of the margins of the roster, right? It's like New York has just a much deeper group that they can pull from to get reliable rotation minutes from a Josh Hart, for example, from an Isaiah Hartenstein. Versus Cleveland, you see the other side of that, where they're struggling to find a fifth guy, much less a sixth or a seventh guy. And a lot of their fate in the series is going to come down to, do you get a good Karis LeVert game on this night? Do you get a good Dean Wade game on this night? And if they can just get tape enough of those things together to get an actual workable rotation, then they're going to be in business. But until then, it's just so much is already falling on their 4 core stars. And those guys played massive minutes in a loss.
Absolutely. You had Mitchell at 44 minutes, Garland at 43, Allen at 43, Mobley at 38. That's a lot of minutes for those guys. And as you said, JB Bickerstaff, the Cavs head coach, is looking for a fifth guy. You got Isaac Okoro, who great defensive player, heady cutter and all that, but limited shooter. All year long, though, he shoots over 40% from three since around mid-December. The numbers look good, but he's getting left wide open a lot. He goes 0 for 4 in game one. He's going to have to either find his shot like he did during the season, but it's tough during the playoffs. Those closeouts are a little bit closer. The pressure is so much higher. And then if you go in with Jetty Osman, yes, he goes 2 for 3 from behind the arc, but then you have him defending Jalen Brunson. It just feels like that fifth spot is an issue for the Cavaliers lineups right now.
I mean, it was an issue to the point that you're right. They did have Jetty Osman defending Jalen Brunson, and it was probably their best option, right? Like it was, he was playing the best. He was playing the best of those supporting guys, and at least he had some length at that matchup. But Okoro is a great example of the kind of player the Cavs need, right? He is a guy who does play with a lot of physicality, has a tenacity to him, goes after some of the loose balls. They could probably have used him in some of those rebounding scrums or battling with Josh Hart. It's just tough when you're going like high intensity, as you're mentioning, corner threes, wide open shots. Can you make 2 of 4, 1 of 4? Can you do enough, not even to make the Knicks guard you, but at least to punish them for leaving you?
Absolutely. And I think for the Cavaliers on the offensive end of the floor, for them, they score 97 points in game one. There's a lot of contributing factors from that. I mean, just the fact they shot 32% from three. But I think with the Cavs all year long, one of the things I liked about them is like how many layers to their offense they have, like with sets that they run, putting Mitchell at the elbow, using double bigs. Like they just have so many different ways that they attack you and create through Mitchell and Garland as their main sources of offense. But in game one, there was often times where I'm like, just push it up the floor and run a high pick and roll with Mitchell, because you look at their numbers over the course of the season, according to Inpredictable, their time of possession ranks, they were 29th in time to shot after the opponent made a basket, 22nd after misses, 25th after turnovers. So even when they're out in transition, they're moving slow. Never mind being, 29th after the opponent makes a basket. So I think for Cleveland moving forward in the series, Mitchell takes 30 shots. And yet I come away from that game feeling like that you can get even more from him just by stripping things down and speeding up a little bit and just getting it to some high pick and roll with Mitchell. Is there anything that you think is contributing to some of these real stagnant stretches for the Cleveland offense? And do you see any micro adjustments they could possibly make moving forward?
Well, the spacing is a real thing, right? Like if we're talking about defenses leaving guys like Okoro or leaving basically anyone you plug in there in that fifth spot, the combination of that plus playing two fairly traditional bigs at the same time is going to gum things up, right? That's going to make it hard for Mitchell to get all the way to the basket or Garland to get all the way to the basket sometimes. I'm totally with you on transition. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. And that sounds like Darius Garland's music to me. Mitchell is the most explosive athlete on the team. Obviously is incredible in transition, not only as a finisher, but drawing fouls. But he's just going to have such a heavy workload. You can kind of see him in this game pacing himself early, trying not to get like too fatigued because he knows he's going to have a long night. He knows he's going to get up 30 something shots. Garland has to be able to push in those situations too. That's where he has to, especially as a smaller guard, take advantage of some of the space you have. Take advantage of the fact that all the bigs are not going to be in the paint necessarily if you sprint it up court. But the Cavs guards have to be on top of that stuff. They have to be able to get those points because honestly, they did enough defensively, even giving up all those rebounds to the Knicks to win. They just couldn't score.
And I think, along those same lines with Darius Garland, Rob, this entire, game one, 101-97, low score, it's the opposite of what we saw on that same night with the Warriors and Kings where it's just flying up and down the floor. But that Knicks-Cavs game, I thought it kind of illustrated, which was a theme in most of the games, not all, but most of the games so far, where, free throws are down. 23.5 free throw attempts were the average over the course of the full regular season, down to 21.4 over opening weekend. The Knicks are playing like grab and hold defense. The physicality, right away is just apparent, both in the play-in and the playoffs so far, and just the dramatic difference that is for offenses to have to deal with between the season and the playoffs too.
It's so different, right? And you can especially see it with these young teams on the other side of it, right? Cleveland did look a little bothered by some of that physicality. And while we don't think of the Knicks as being this team entrenched with veterans, Jalen Brunson has some playoff runs under his belt. Julius Randle has seen some of these battles before, and moreover, is just like a bulldozer, right? Whenever he wants to be. And we saw him get away with some of that contact. Every game's going to be officiated a little bit differently, but you're right. The line overall is going to allow that holding. It's going to reward the teams that are willing to go after it. It's going to reward, as we saw not only in this game, but with Sacramento, with Philadelphia, go after the offensive glass. Really dig in, get into the scrape, and try to come up with some extra possessions because the opportunity is there. If you're willing to bump people a little bit, to grab and hold, you're going to come up with some rewards.
Rob, when we're back, we're going to talk about the real MVP, Austin Reaves. Well, Rob, the Lakers have a new star, don't they?
He's been hiding in plain sight the whole time. What were we waiting for? Why did we ever think that they needed to trade for Kyrie Irving or anyone else? Austin Reaves is here.
Austin Reaves right now averaging 16.5 points, 5 assists per game, low turnovers, great efficiency ever since the trade deadline. I mean, what he did in game one, granted for people who are watching the Lakers for the first time, it's playoffs, more eyeballs. You're like, Austin Reaves. But he's been doing this for, 2 months now for the Lakers. And the cool part about that, though, is seeing LeBron James and Anthony Davis just move out of the way. Like, they were just picking on what they felt was the most exploitable matchup against that Grizzlies defense that was switching. And they just said, oh, we'll face your drop coverage instead. And LeBron and AD let Reaves go.
This is a crazy thing to think, but it was a very LeBron-esque approach from Austin Reaves in the sense that you're right. Find the matchup you like, spam that button over and over and over because you're getting great looks out of it. And I think what made this performance particularly sensational for Reaves is we've seen him in games, dupe people with pump fakes, create a lot of contact, get to the free throw line over and over and over. He's been selling people with fakes all season long. This wasn't really that, right? It was just sensational passes, incredible shot making against a really good defense, right? Like a Memphis team that even given its injuries, even given its situation, should have been able to guard those actions, has a lot of really tough, really good players, and yet they just had no answers for anything Austin Reaves was dishing out.
Well, and I think the tough thing for the Lakers, I mean, you got Austin Reaves, ending the game. He has 23 points. He finishes them off in the fourth quarter. But then you have guys like Rui Hachimura who have 29 points on 11 of 14. He's looking like, Japanese Jordan pulling up from mid-range. It was like that's what happens in the playoffs. There's surprises, on a game-to-game basis. And I think for the Lakers, this is why I was so high on them after the deadline. It's why I continue to be high on them now in the postseason. I picked the Suns to go to the finals, prior to the playoffs beginning. We'll see about that after they get, lose to the Clippers in game one. But the Lakers, they just have, LeBron played a sloppy game. And AD, he was dominant, but he misses a little bit of time. He gets hurt. And yet I feel like this Lakers team after the deadline with D'Angelo Russell, Austin Reaves in his new role, guys like Rui, they just have different ways that they can beat you on offense, and they have different guys who can be competitive on defense, like Dennis Schroeder being a big part of that as well. This Lakers team is just really deep, and I felt like in that game one, that's what gave them a big edge over the Grizzlies, and why I don't feel great about Memphis moving forward in the series, even if Ja Morant is able to return on Wednesday night for game two.
Yeah, I mean, the Lakers have a good shot, right? This was kind of a coin flip series, I think, for a lot of people coming in to begin with. If Ja Morant is hurt, that changes the math a lot. And even in this game, I don't know how we could expect Jaren Jackson Jr. to play better than he did in game one. One of his best games ever as a pro, especially offensively, what he was able to get done inside. And yet it wasn't quite enough for exactly the reasons you outlined. Like the Lakers just had enough of their supporting cast hitting where they had the complete picture. They had the whole profile. When I think about the Lakers, I do still have some skepticism overall in terms of this as a real contender, right? And some of that is, while Austin Reaves dominating while LeBron and AD watch is kind of a cool moment, you're right. Like LeBron was really sloppy in this game and also just kind of stepping back and taking it easy on a lot of possessions in a way that makes me worry a little bit about the state of his foot. It makes me worry about his ability to crank it up as often as he's probably going to need to. Because while you get one good Rui Hachimura game every 3 or 4, you also have the other 2 or 3 games to contend with. And that's kind of the way a lot of this Lakers roster goes, is you're going to get some good games from Rui or Dennis Schroeder or D'Angelo Russell. If you can string enough together, you can win a series like this. But against further competition beyond this series, let's assume maybe we're fast forwarding too far. But, even going in this series, if the Grizzlies are able to get a little healthier with Ja back, I'm not counting on all those guys delivering every night.
I think that's fair. I mean, LeBron is in his late 30s at this point. He's coming off a major injury. AD made a glass. He comes back in game one, but it's only inevitable until he's, screaming on the floor again at some point. It seems like for the Lakers, it's going to be health related, whether those guys are on the floor or not, with how it influences their production. And for the Grizzlies right now, though, Rob, I think you can say the same thing. We see Ja Morant's hand, he bends backwards pretty much. And he says after the game, he's really in a somber mood. He says he's, unlikely to play Wednesday night. We'll see, what comes out tomorrow when that report comes out, if he is indeed going to be able to play. But even with Ja, I watched that game, and you mentioned Jaren Jackson, how magnificent he was. Like he's, good as always on defense. He has 31 points on offense, scoring every which way. I come away feeling like Steven Adams, his, him not being out there for Memphis is a problem right now. Facing that Lakers size, their ability to get into the paint, and without Adams out there, you have Jaren Jackson playing drop defense late in the game rather than have him in a position where he's roaming off ball, wreaking havoc. That's why Jaren Jackson Jr. was on so many Defensive Player of the Year ballots this year, was because of that primary role next to Steven Adams. And that's what I feel like is really missing for the Grizzlies right now. And there's no word on Adams. Woj reported that he's unlikely to return in the series. I worry about Memphis without Adams out there, Rob. I think he is a critically important player that's gone underrated this season.
Yeah, you're either asking Jaren Jackson Jr. to do what you described, doing something he's good at but not great at in terms of playing a more traditional drop style, being your on-ball or at least on-screener pick-and-roll defender. Or you're playing a lot of Xavier Tillman, and all due respect to Xavier Tillman, works his ass off, good post defender, complete non-threat offensively. The Lakers are...
And that's because Brandon Clark is out. That's why you're even playing Tillman. It's not just Adams, it's no Clark.
You're absolutely right. Those are piling up and overlapping, and you can see the cascading effects there to the point that you're either playing a lot of Tillman or... the alternative there is what you're going to throw in Santi Aldama. The Grizzlies are already kind of scrunched up in terms of what the rotation looks like in a way that is probably healthy for them, right? You don't want to run too deep into your bench, even if you do have a good bench. You need to play your stars big minutes, but you need Steven Adams. He was the guy who was kind of the backbone of this team, certainly in terms of rebounding, gives you a lot as a screener, but defensively he was so important for them.
Where do you stand on the debate that kind of was sparked on Sunday night between banning the charge? We see Ja get hurt, Giannis get hurt in similar situations. Recently, Embiid had a really scary fall, when a player was attempting to take a charge against him. There's thousands of blocks/charges that are attempted, over the course of the season. It's a tool for defenses to get stops around the basket. Otherwise, you'd see Giannis put up actual Wilt Chamberlain numbers. But where do you stand on that? Do you think there's a better approach for the NBA from a rules standpoint than what they currently have? What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I think the incentives are pretty busted, to be honest with you, because right now defenders, that's what they're told to do. That's what they're taught to do. That's what the rules have instructed them to do, is stand in front of these guys who are launching themselves at the rim, get under them, undercut them late if you have to, and you might still get the call. And, there's gray area with this stuff. For example, Ja Morant's injury, I thought AD was in legal guarding position. Ja Morant's trying to jump over him. That's kind of one version of that case. The other one, I think, is what we saw with Milwaukee and Miami, which to me, Giannis is off his feet, on one foot, going up, already started his upward motion. Kevin Love is sliding underneath him in a way that's really dangerous. And so if that's where the incentives are in the league, that's a huge problem. I think there needs to be room to legislate offensive fouls. Obviously, you push a guy off, you lower your shoulder, you're running straight into them. There's room to call that an offensive foul. But the way the charge rule is set up now, and whether it's due to the location of the circle or just the way it's officiated, we're just getting guys hurt left and right, plain and simple.
So you would change the rule then?
Absolutely. I think it unquestionably needs to be changed.
There were players on NBA Twitter this week I saw come out and respond to multiple articles and tweets saying, what do you want us to do? You remove this from us? What are we supposed to do? Defend at the rim? Do you think perhaps it's removing the charge, maybe moving the restricted area away from where it currently is, the block charge circle? Is it other rule changes, that come attached to changing that rule, like allowing more hand checking? Is there anything else that needs to be revised in order to change the block charge? Because I personally think just removing the block charge, like I said, Giannis is going to average 45 points per game. Jokic is going to be even more dominant. It's going to be absurd what players would be able to do around the basket without that. Is there anything else that could kind of, balance things out a little bit more?
I think the hand checking is a great counterbalance, right? I'm all for more physicality on the perimeter. I'm all for, frankly, calling more fouls inside. I think post players in general get a really raw deal in terms of the physicality that's allowed. There's just a total incongruency in terms of what's allowed.
More fouls, more whistles. You see Mark Davis more, Rob?
That's not what I'm aiming for necessarily. But look, I'm all for allowing more contact on the perimeter if it means safer play inside. We talk about the charge circle as if it's something that's always existed, right? As if it's not just a creation that the NBA introduced to try to protect defenders. there were eras of basketball before it. There would be eras of basketball after it. I think there's lots of ways to legislate and to create a safer playing environment. I just don't understand why we would want a rule that rewards sliding under someone who's in the air with no excess penalty other than, oh, they might shoot a couple free throws and then have to leave the game like Giannis did. Actually, no, Giannis didn't even get the free throws. I take that back.
Sure, he did it. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what, Rob. I think the NBA needs to take a long look at a lot of rules, and they should not hesitate to make dramatic changes. We see what's happened in baseball this year with the pitch clock, how even, traditionalist baseball fans are like, oh it's pretty good. It's pretty nice. So I think for the NBA, they should not hesitate to making changes to the rules that they feel improves the aesthetic of the game, which brings in more fans, draws more interest, brings in more money to the players. I mean, I think the NBA needs to be as innovative as they think to improve the game, and it does start with the rules. Let's move on to the Nuggets and T-Wolves. Denver dominates game one. Jokic is scoring all his points inside the paint despite going against a Gobert cat front line. He has that crazy spin moves, post up, drive, whatever it was. Oh my goodness gracious. One of the most beautiful moves I've seen in the entire season. This series feels over already, Rob.
My instinct is always to pump the brakes, let's give Minnesota a chance. Let's wait and see. What do you do with a Nuggets performance like that? Because if Denver comes out and plays like this, with this, at least this kind of focus, I don't think they played a perfect game. Certainly you saw slow starts from guys like Jamal Murray, for example, bits and pieces of this game where things went off the rails for them a little bit, but overall they were just in complete control of it. And that's what this series is, right? This is a 1-8 for a reason. This is often what these series look like. Minnesota has been a mess, has not really been able to figure out or establish any kind of consistency all throughout the year. They've shown they can lose any kind of game. They've shown they can blow leads. I don't know why we would expect them to come in and beat Denver. I don't know why we would expect them to beat them even a couple times in the series. This feels like we're destined for a dominant win for the Nuggets.
And then with the Suns and the Clippers go up 1-0 on the road ahead of their game 2 on Tuesday. Russell Westbrook has the greatest 3-for-19 performance in the history of basketball. I mean, the defense he played, the hustle, the blocks, the steals, the deflection off of Devin Booker in the closing moments as Booker's whining to the referees. Hey, man, I've been a Russ hater for a long time. I've also had a little bit of belief in him being able to do what he's done in that game one. It was cool to watch, Rob. It was really cool to watch Russell Westbrook do all the little things.
Just so many incredible moments from him. And you get those from Russ a lot, but I thought overall his level of defensive intensity and defensive attention to detail, something we don't always attribute to Russell Westbrook, a guy who over his career will wander away from a play, will gamble, will sit and watch on the perimeter a little bit if he gets caught behind a play. He's doing flyby contests behind Kevin Durant, bothering the hell out of him on his release. He's chasing down rebounds. He's fighting for every opportunity. Sensational game. Again, in every dimension other than the fact that he just could not hit shots or really convert around the rim at all, but came up with so many of those huge plays. How do you fault a showing like that?
You mentioned his contest against Kevin Durant. I mean, granted, Kevin Durant ends up with 11 assists in the game. He has, 27 points, only 15 shots. Ayton has 16. I think for Phoenix, it goes without saying their depth is a concern. You look at their bench, you get Landry Shamet and Ish Wainwright, Okogie playing only 7 minutes, Jock Landale with 8. Their depth is concerning. But Kevin Durant getting 15 shots to 8 and 16, that can't happen in this series. I don't think Phoenix is going to win if they continue to give Kevin Durant that type of usage.
Well, especially those two things in conjunction, right? If Kevin Durant's going to play 45 minutes, he needs to shoot more than 15 times, even with the free throw attempts in addition to that. The depth is a concern, right? And I think it was for a lot of us coming in, whether you're pinpointing a specific guy in the rotation, whether you're saying is Josh Okogie going to be able to hit his shots? Is Torrey Craig going to be able to hand up against playoff scrutiny? Bismack Biyombo or Jock Landale, are these guys really playable in the playoffs? Moreover, it was pretty clear from this game that Monty Williams does not trust those players, does not really trust anybody other than really the core starters, plus some time from Torrey Craig. Landry Shamet, I thought, gave them some decent minutes and certainly some very important pressure release baskets in transition, just getting out to get an easy bucket now and again in a really hard fought game. But Williams is going to have to find someone he can trust on this roster, right? This is sustainable to a point, but you can't be playing Chris Paul and Devin Booker and Kevin Durant huge minutes every single game.
I mean, on the other side of that, you see Ty Lue. He can trust Kawhi Leonard, who right now looks like the best player in the entire series, if not the entire league right now after that game one opening 3 days of the NBA playoffs. Rob, I appreciate you joining me today on Beyond the Arc.
Thanks, Kev. Anytime.